Yeah. Yeah. Well, we don't care about the audience online.
Yeah, I think everyone is okay. Don't see me. Okay. Every one online can hear. I think so.
There's a lot of audience online.
They can hear you.
I was joking.
Okay, maybe stop it. Okay, good. Let's get started. First, let me actually introduce Dr. Andrew Crooks. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Andrew Crooks, professor in the Department of Geography at the University at Buffalo. Dr. Crooks earned his PhD in geography from University College London and previously served as a leading faculty member in computational social science at George Mason University. And his work lies at the intersection of urban analytics, GIS science, social network analysis, and agent-based modeling, which provides innovative ways to monitor, model, and understand how cities grow and change. Dr. Crooks is the lead author of this widely used book, Agent-Based Modeling and Geographical Information, a Practical Primer. So this is the book I used to learn agent-based modeling. Also the same book I gave my students for them to learn agent-based modeling. So if you want to actually understand how much agent-based modeling works, this is a great book with a lot of hands-on experiences. So Dr. Crooks is also a co-editor of the journal Environmental and Planning B, Urban Analytics and City Science. His research has been supported by numerous US government agencies, and he currently serves on several international GIS editorial boards. Today, Dr. Crooks will present monitoring and analyzing cities through the lens of urban analytics, which will demonstrate how emerging data sources and AI can deepen our understanding of urban systems and their broader applications. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Crooks. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Am I red? Because I always get embarrassed when you read about it, but it's very good. Thank you so much. And thank you all for having me here today. I have a habit of going over in talks. So when you want me to shut up, can you just give me like a 2-minute warning and just wrap up, okay?
Okay.
So I want to talk about urban analytics today, but also the basically the monitoring, analyzing, and modeling cities. And I'll explain why I'm talking about those 3 different things as we sort of go through these slides. I always tend to go on too much, so I want to say up front, thank you to all the people I work with. I have some really great PhD students, Ting Chen, Boyu Wang, and then recently Na Jing, who's just left and gone to Hong Kong, but other people around the world that I've been working with and my sponsors. Without these people and other people I probably missed out here, and the things, none of this stuff I'm showing you today would be possible to be shown, really. So, so I'm interested in cities, right? And why I'm interested in this. You often hear this. This for the first time in human history, back in 2008, 2009. More people living in cities than in rural areas. That was like a first, right? And this is just going to keep ongoing, right? So cities are going to grow to 6.7 billion. So another 2 billion people or more are going to be living in cities by 2050. That's going to cause lots of challenges, right? Aging populations. Where will these people be located and things like that, right? But these cities themselves are dynamic. They're not static. They're constantly changing. Today, University of Delaware campus is busy with students. In a month's time, it'll be relatively quiet, right? These cities change, places change. We have spring here, and Buffalo is still winter. But the idea is things are changing. They're made up of discrete actors operating in space and then over time. And if we need to sort of understand cities to get a better sense of, you know, what we can, or how we can potentially intervene with these cities, with respect to public policy, natural defence issues, health, climate change, and so forth. And this is sort of just a trend from online showing you how the population has been changing over time from the World Bank. But the way we look at cities is also changing. We are today sort of awash with data. That sort of data tsunami, and that kind of, you know, and you know, one way of looking at cities is through data and through those types of things. You know, and there's been a lot of growth in data. And one way of looking at cities and through data is through urban analytics. And often I use the citation by Mike Barry, who's sort of the main editor of Environmental Value that I'm on. You know, he says, you know, urban analytics implies a set of methods that are used to explore, understand, and predict the properties of a system, or in our case, sort of cities, right? You know, and you know, as we are awash with these new data, high frequency data from check-in, mobile phone types of data, low frequency data, being, you know, your decadal censuses, gives us that new lens to sort of explore the city and the world around us. And the question is, how can we leverage urban analytical techniques to sort of better understand the world around us? But things change, right? One thing I've realized as I'm getting older is the way we look at cities has changed. Our ideas of cities have changed, but also just sort of, sorry, let me hide that book here. Our cities have changed. So the journal I'm an editor of just turned 50 last year, and we were curious on what has been changing in the topics or the titles coming into this. So this is the all-time words used in people's titles of papers, and this is, you know, what people would be writing about when it comes to urban analytics back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, aughts. I still don't like the aughts as a decade, but still that's many. The teens, and more recently. And what you can sort of see here, oops, back here. What you can sort of see here is design, planning, development, analysis comes in. By 1990s, 2000s, GIS has started to appear as a term. Land use is still becoming very important. Analysis is still there. Networks are making a big growth in this. What I'm trying to say is there's lots of tools at our disposal to understand city and urban analytics in these types of things. And you also see a large growth in China in more recent decade, partly because a lot of people are publishing case studies and applications in China, right? So that's why you see China there, they picked up there. It's also really fascinating to look at authorship over time, and there's very few authors back in the 70s and 80s from China. Now they make the bulk of many of the papers in our journal. But the idea is analytics is sort of pervasive, but the topics change. And that's also my research has also changed over time as well. But really what I want to talk about today is how we can go about monitoring the world around us, capturing that type of data and analyzing that, and then end on modeling, and also why I think modeling is important. And there's a lot of sort of data out there that we want to talk about, and I'll come back to this later, both user-generated official data and non-traditional data sets. But we need all of this to be able to sort of close that loop between modeling and analyzing, and where do we need more data? How do we get those types of data sets and things like this? And again, you know, the types of data we look at. So first, I want to talk about monitoring, and I'll go through then analyzing, then I'll go through modeling towards the end of the talk. Data, the world is changing. The way we look at the city, the urban form and function, its urban morphology has changed. When I first started my PhD, this is really what was available to us, right? Traditional government agencies. So it'd be like National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NOAA, weather data, census data, things like that, right? But you guys who are doing your research now have access to all these types of data sets as well, right? It might be X, Yelp, you know, Flickr. You might be like, I'm using now Flickr to look at dust storm events, and then using which is thing, or looking at comments or iNaturalist for wildlife sightings in urban areas. Like that. But the idea is these new data sets allow us to understand both the form and the function of cities. The form is really what the city looks like, right? The built infrastructure, the roads, the houses, things like that. Traditionally, we get these from pedestrian records or whatever. Now we can get this from OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap gives us road networks, gives us building heights and things like that. Function, how do we use the city? What is the land use in the area? You might have official land use regulations, right? So tax records, zoning things. Now we can use Foursquare, Wikimedia or other types of things to really work out how people perceive and use the space around us. I'll go into some examples of this when it comes to analysing the city. But the idea is there's lots of data out there that we can now use to start monitoring cities. And again, some of this might be have a geographical component like mapillary, which gives street view imagery data, or OpenStreetMap, SafeGraph. Other data like newspaper articles will have toponyms, place names inside of them. You can mine that, then geolocate those newspaper articles to specific locations and so forth. Now, there's lots, like I said, lots of data. When I was a postdoc, I spent a year building a database of urban form and function for London. Right. So the idea was we wanted to understand the geometry, the form, what's being here, build that together. Once we have this data, we can then ask what's if questions, right? So for example, where do people live, residential location type of thing. How can we use what's the land use in an area? How are places connected? But we need data to answer these types of questions or urban analytical types of approaches. And we built this database. It took us a long time to build it to answer some types of questions. And I say now though, we can just go on, and we can build this detailed functional map of residential areas, commercial areas within the city of London, for example. This is the national. I'm blanking on where the Rosetta Stone is. Natural. Oh. Anyone? Elgin Marbles. The museum in London. Oh gosh, I'm sure. Anyway, Soho and downtown London. The British Museum, of course. Right, that's it. But sorry, the idea is we can merge data sets together to get a better standing of the functional usage of London, or where do people live, right? Commercial areas. These green areas, residential, the red and the black types of areas. But again, you get patterns of things like that, right? This is traditional way of capturing of data, but now we have crowdsourced data. So I was building this database of London Tower View. The armchair geographer, manually create these maps. OpenStreetMap is a classic example of that, right? From OpenStreetMap, we also have open building height data associated with buildings, right? So people are tagging things that are making them up. This is giving us new lenses to monitor and study cities. We also know after an event like an earthquake or hurricane, people go in and update those maps, right? So rather than having to wait for an official government release of a map, you can go into OpenStreetMap and get a more up-to-date map, like after the Haiti earthquake back in 2010, so to speak. What I'm trying to say is, get excited. There's lots of ways of looking at data, a lot of ways of collecting data that might not be traditional, right? And that's gives us that new way of sort of looking at the city. And there's also new ways of analysing the city, right? And looking at the city. So, I'm trained in GIS, so I did a lot of GIS work over time. But now this is, so that would be using ArcGIS or whatnot. And traditional GIS analysis is you take some type of visual data, try to then predict something or look at correlation, right, from those types of analysis. So what we try to do here is we try to look at how employment, population, and accessibility within London can be used to predict how many new jobs would be in a new area if you increase accessibility or whatever, right? So the idea is you take your data sets, you do some simple sort of regression over that, and then you try to predict what, if you increase accessibility in an area, how many new jobs will be created, right? So here's some work that was being done for the Greater London Authority during my PhD, because they sort of sponsored my PhD, and we look sort of trying to understand basically if we increase accessibility, we get X number of jobs. So, and that's what, you know, increase resident population by 1,000, you get around 250 new jobs in an area. That's traditional spatial analysis, right? Look at simple GIS operations in RPA. But now we can look at this new types of data, new different techniques. So natural language processing. How many of you guys have done some natural language processing? Some of you, okay. Do you know what natural language processing means? Looking at words and deriving meaning from words, basically, right? So here, instead of using traditional data, like from the census, I'm using social media data from Twitter or X. I still don't like X, I'm going to keep calling it Twitter if you don't mind, on that. But the idea is we mine Twitter data to understand what people feel about the city or areas. So this is part of DC, we have Adam Morgan, DuPont, this is a business area, this is not for the White House, and you sort of see, looking at people's posts, you can see people in the business area talk about politics and sports. Sort of makes sense, right? It's DC. Look at Adams Morgan, again, politics, again, it's DC. But they also talk about entertainment, because Adams Morgan is where you go out for drinks after work, and there's bands and music and things like that. Georgetown, being that university type area, is the only place in DC that talks about education or academic types of things. So different types of data, different types of analysis using natural language processing gives us that ability to sort of look at the form and function of cities. And we can sort of extend this to look at alignment or disalignment between areas. So if we're interested in sort of the theatre sub-district in New York City, right? Anyone goes to shows. I've never actually been to the theatre sub-district, right? But I've studied it, right? Which is a bit weird, really. But this area here is delineated as the theatre subdistrict by New York City, right? The red dots, on the other hand, are what we've detected on social media, so mining the text, right? To be related to entertainment. And you sort of see a slight pull one way, and that's sort of the off-Broadway shows happening in those areas. These are some geolocated tweets, so people posting social media messages. We can look at different types of activity in the cities and look at, say, Central Park as social recreation. These maps are made by people commenting about areas. We take the comments those people have done, classify them into certain groupings, right? So you can sort of see, and then you can look at public transport areas or business areas down in Wall Street, for example. But the idea is we can use new sources of data to get the different view or alignment or disalignment between different areas. So if people are talking about parks in an area and there are no parks, that could be an area for public planning to add something to those types of areas. And it's not just English, you can do it in different languages or different cities. So we can look at entertainment clusters in, say, the whole of New York City or Los Angeles. You can also pick out where universities are through what people are talking about in here. So the blue area, the universities within LA, for example, right? And you can detect different functional aspects in sort of social media types of posts. We can do it for other countries like Singapore, London. And the method works, right? In again, caveat here, this is all in English because I'm terrible. I'm not very good at any other language but English. And when I first came to America, students said I didn't speak very good English. Right? But you can do other weird things with this data as well, right? Trying to understand, analyze the city in a different way than this simple GIS analysis, right? So smellscapes, this is some work I'm doing with Ching Chen, this got published in the Annals of the Association of American Geographers last week, and Ching's really interested in smells, right? So smells really hard to do. Trying to understand urban smells, to really do it properly, you have to do smellscape walks. To do smellscape walks, you have to literally walk around and smell, right, and record your smells. Now, trying to do that at scale is really impossible, right? So what Ching's interested in doing is analyzing social media data to try to detect those unpleasant smells, or those different types of smells within the city, right? And then relate that back to actually infrastructure within the city and things like that. So the idea is, we often look at cities and we look from a visual perspective, that visual dominance of studying cities. But in reality, there's more visual is only one of our senses. We've got the hearing, we've got the smell, the taste, you know, and other things. So Gigi's interested in mapping sort of the invisible here within inside of this. She has a very complicated workflow. All of these works that I'm showing you are like 20,000 foot view things. There's a lot of methodology goes into all of this, but nearly all the papers that we write, the methodology and the notebooks are all available online. So you can reproduce nearly anything that we produce here, with the caveat that you can't get the data because Twitter doesn't allow us to share data. But the idea is we get the data, we spend a lot of time cleaning data. So here we're looking at social media data. We have several years of geolocated data from that. We have around 56 million tweets. We clean these, remove things that we don't think are important. We build a smell dictionary, words where we know are associated with certain types of smells and odors. Then basically identify some specific categories of smells, right, within inside of this, and then we can map it. Once we can derive the smell ideas, we can then look at where these sort of maps are. So the idea is we get the sort of this smell map of New York City. So you sort of think nature is the green. The green is happening in Central Park and Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and things like that. You'll have food smells in Flushing, known for its food, for example. You have waste or smoke smells around Port Authority and places like that. So it correlates, right? So again, this analyzing data through natural language processing technique gives us that sort of ability to detect things that might have been invisible to detect inside of here. You also get fuel smells around JFK Airport, right? So it sort of matches our senses with understanding what's happening. And then we can weave, there's also different ways of visualizing data. Because smells are not one thing. There'll be multiple smells, even in this room, there's going to be multiple smells, right? And there's this technique developed by David O'Sullivan called cross-stitching, where you can weave overlapping categorical data together to sort of get a sense of really what's happening. So the idea is you stitch together these smells to create these sort of smell maps, see what's dominant in what types of areas, right? So again, if we look at different areas, so for example, if you're looking at Manhattan, you're sort of getting a really quite a large diverse mix of things compared to number 3, which is your fuel smells and so forth down at the airport, right? But the idea is trying to visualize multiple categories of smells in one area is quite tricky, but this weaving technique sort of helps us understand that. So we can analyze cities. We can do it through traditional GIS method. We can do it through natural language processing, and there's lots and lots of data, right? And as a, as every data scientist like to think, they can solve all the world's problems with their algorithms if they have the right data, right? But as this quote from, anyone pronounce that name better than me, Heraclitus? I should really know. This guy was an ancient Greek philosopher, and I like this quote. There's no man that steps in the same river twice, but it's not the same man, nor is it the same river, right? What I mean by that is, we have data, but data is only good enough for certain things. So if we had data, for example, from 2011 to current day, we would have missed the 2009 financial crisis, right? So there's a lot of unknown data and things like that. Now, that gets me into the first part of our type of work we should look at is the modeling side of things, right? Trying to ask the what if types of things, questions that data alone might not be able to give us. And that's sort of where I go into sort of modeling. And the modeling I'm really interested in is trying to model people. Why do people make decisions and where and things like that? And this also ties into the notion of how we look at cities. Cities are relatively, traditionally, planning was a top-down process. Planners thought they could control the city, but in reality, the city sort of is made up of individuals. Those individuals interact that form the city. So the idea is, there's been a shift from top down to more bottom up, and that's also seen in urban modelling, from spatial interaction models and that would dominate the scene in the 1960s and 70s, to other types of approaches like agent-based modelling. And the idea is to move away from trying to say robbery we have crime because of education deprivation in a number of young males in an area. We're trying to understand a bit more of this correlation, but also causation, but also explore the who, where, what, and why people do what they do. And one of the ways of doing that is through agent-based modeling. Some of you might know agent-based modeling, some of you might not. So I just want to give a very simple introduction to it. Which like I assume everyone knows about GIS. In agent-based models, we create artificial worlds. We populate these artificial worlds with people. We give these people rules, and then something happens. So, and these rules can be very simple if statements or else statements. So, if a certain condition is met, then take an action. Else, do something else. So, for example, if fire alarm goes off, then leave building. Else, stay here until I'm told to shut up. Right. And we apply that to many agents and get them to sort of do things like this. And, and this also goes back to Tobler's first law of geography. Things that everything is related to everything else, but nearer things are more related than distant things. So we can capture those types of notions in here as well. So we can talk about local interactions, global interactions, and so forth within side of these models. The classic ABM would be the traffic model. Traffic model sort of, there's some really widely used areas in based modeling, pedestrian movement and also traffic models. And this is very much of an American model. So each car is an individual agent. No one likes capital, right? We give these individual agents here two simple rules. If there's a car ahead of you, you speed up. No, sorry. If there's a car ahead of you, you don't speed up. That's what happens. You crash, right?
Yeah.
If there's no car ahead of you, you speed up. If there is a car ahead of you, you slow down. That's mostly how I drive, right? And it's probably mostly how many of you guys drive, yeah? It's those simple rules applied to many agents lead to basically things happening. So, for example, it's very hard for us to drive at a constant speed, right? Unless you've got cruise control, right? And you might get distracted. Then that causes the person behind you to slow down. So while all the cars are moving forward, traffic jams can go backwards, but there's no car crash here, just people's inability to slow down. We also get things like here, individual trajectory of a red car, and then sort of the average traffic speed. So we get these things, macro patterns of traffic jams emerging from individual level interactions. And it does work, this type of thing. There's a movie online of like 30 Japanese researchers driving around in a car park, in a circle, all being told to travel at 30 kilometers per hour, but they can't do that. Therefore, they slow down and traffic jams form, right? So we can test these models in reality. We can do things, we can test them in silico. The nice thing is, these types of models, we build them and we do things that we can't really do in reality. I can't set a building on fire and see how people evacuate, right? But I can simulate that. Well, I could set a building on fire, but then I'd go to jail. Not a good idea. But the idea is, but we can also, build these models from abstract type of representations to sort of real world, so link that to GIS data. So I might be interested in looking at a housing market model, right? I'm interested in urban decline, urban shrinkage, urban growth, gentrification. If I'm interested in those types of things, I might say, where do people live, right? So we have our agents. They need data. So where could they live? Where's the current built area? Where is the current road networks? What is the current population density? Some people might like high density areas, would be right where they by themselves. What are house prices? Cost, I can only afford to buy a house in a certain type of location. We throw those together, and by letting our agents make decisions based on the data available, they can sort of housing markets might emerge through these types of interactions. So in order then, GIS is great. We're creating our models because it creates our layers and objects, our objects being the people or houses or areas of interest and types of things. To give a sense of how we can use these layers and objects in a model, think about commuting to and from work, right? I know some people travel from Pennsylvania to here on a daily basis, right? When I used to live in DC, I used to always have to drive around Tyson's Corner. And I was curious, why does Tyson's Corner so bad at traffic? Well, I knew why, it was too many cars, right? But I was curious, where did all those people come from? So So here, I want to build a simple traffic model, right? A simple traffic model. So these areas, the green areas, census tracts, where we know people live and work in Texas Corner. We get that from the census data, right? So we can parameterize the model of agents leaving their houses, then driving to work. And I apologize, there are people living here, but I forgot about West Virginia when I was building this map. But yes, West Virginia was accidentally taken out. But the idea, so we can build a model, so we can assign our agents to the green areas. Say you need to be at work at a certain time, let them leave their houses, they travel along the roads, obeying the speed limits, 30 miles, 40 mile an hour, 55, whatever the speed limit is. And you sort of see where traffic jams sort of form, especially around the Tyson's Corner area. But these are very sort of simple model of agents just commuting around sort of different parts of the city. But the idea is we can use data to build these types of models to make them realistic. And we build models for a whole wide variety of applications, right? And we can explore the micro movement of pedestrians, or even random things like basketball. So there's a lot of areas of sport analytics now when it comes to capturing people's movement. How can you use that to understand what's happening? To long-term things like long-term migration. Like in East Africa, there's a civil war going on or conflict. Where will people migrate to? How will farmers adapt to different types of climate and climate change within inside of here? How will disease break out in if the cholera breaks out in a refugee camp? How might it spread? And nearly anything in between can be sort of modelled through these types of things at different spatial and temporal scales. And yeah, so we build lots of models using sort of GIS data. And just to talk about a couple that I thought might be more of interest to the audience here. One area I'm really fascinated in is urban growth. And why do people build in really stupid places, i.e. floodplains, right? I mean, there's a reason for that, right? There's only so many places we can build, and there's only so much land we can afford, or houses we can afford. But the idea is, can we start building models to understand flood risk behaviour within inside of this type of work? And this is some work I was doing with Mona Hamati and her advisors. So the idea is we have, say, this is Colorado Springs. I always get Colorado Springs and Boulder mixed up, so I apologize for that. But the idea is this is our map. So you can sort of see the 100-year floodplains here in the green area, and this is where there's been growth inside the floodplains, and then over the last few years, this is where the model's predicting where the growth might occur, right? And this is under one type of scenario. So we can build a model, we can let it run, we can calibrate it. So if we know that what the current growth is today, we can go back to say 1990. Create a model for what the city looked like in 1990, run it to current day and see if it matches. If it matches, we can say that model fits. Then we can ask the question, what happens if we change one parameter or one rule about where development could happen? How might that change the city, right? The idea is we can tune these models to specific areas. And the idea is under different growth scenarios, you basically get land use patterns, right? So again, the question is, how do you stop people building in areas of high risk of flooding and things like that? And sort of that's one area of areas. And then the other question is, people will build in inappropriate areas. The question is, therefore, you know, how does one look at this? So if we have historical data of two areas, so we have this area and this area. This area in the bottom is high risk of flooding. This area up top, low risk of flooding. Cheap houses, expensive houses. Makes sense, right? Rich people don't want to have their houses flooded. Poor people have nowhere else to live. Very broad generalization, I know that. And you can sort of see the buying habits of agents that are given risk preferences with respect to either risk negligent transactions. So blue, they don't care about risk, while red, they do care about risk. And you sort of see more risk negligent actions in the areas more prone to flooding. If we can match past sales records, we can then ask the question, in the future, under certain growth scenarios, where will people be who can afford and also, what's the word? Know about the risks? Where will they locate? In the rich area? People who have no choice, where will they be locating? In the poor area. So you know, the estimate of who will be living where in these types of things. But this is looking at people buying and selling houses. But it's not just about buying and selling houses, it's also the trade. So if I put my house on the market for 500,000, you come along and want to buy my house, but you only offer me 450, we go into a bidding contract, right? And eventually we come with a price we're both happy with. Or one of us walks away. Developers, the same thing, you know, they're developing houses, but they can only sell at a certain price. So we try to capture all the market dynamics, at least housing markets in these types of models. So that's one area that I thought was really interesting. How long left?
About 25 minutes.
Okay, that's one area that I've been interested in is urban growth and urban change and flood risk. Another thing is vaccinations. So I find I've been studying vaccinations and social media campaigns for a long time. And I also always wondered, why do certain people get vaccinated and why do other people not get vaccinated? And there's lots of reasons for this, right? But COVID was a great experiment for many of this. And there's a lot of really intense discussions about COVID vaccines or any types of vaccinations, right? People might be pro vaccine, people might be negative, or people might be totally neutral, right? And we can look at this through social media posts, right? But the question is, and then the question therefore is to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, right? So we know from online newspapers that we study, know or from social media posts. I know from just talking to my own family, there's a lot of diversity, right? Now the question is, how can we model that diversity, try to predict COVID rates in a certain type of area, or COVID vaccines in an area? And for this, we're going to build an agent-based model. In that agent-based model, we're going to link to opinion dynamics. So we start off with, at the beginning of the study, our agents have no real opinion about something. So they haven't been informed, right? And we think everyone's open-minded here, right? Then the question is, at the next time step, you're getting all this information, you're getting pro-vaccine information, anti-vaccine information, neutral information. Who do you trust? What do you trust? Right? Within inside of it. It gets a bit more complicated as well, right? Than that. But the question is, do you vaccinate or not vaccinate? You know, do you trust your lunatic cousin or aunt or your or whatnot? And inside of here, but you know, what causes the decision making within inside of here? So but where do we get our information? So who here uses social media? Come on, everyone should be raising their hands at this point, right? Who believes what they read online? Nobody believes anything they read online. Come on. You must believe some sources of information
With a
online.
grain of salt.
With a grain of salt, right? No, I bring this up, right? Because you obviously, if you didn't believe anything you read online, why are you online reading stuff? Like, no, it's true, right? I'm making a point. The question is, who do you, for information, where do you go and seek it? Twitter.
X.
No, come on. I go and ask, the first person I ask for information is my wife, right? And then I go up to whatever she recommends. No, this is a joke, by the way. I do not do that. But the idea is, there's lots of ways we get information, right? In here, we have physical space, our family group people that we work with. We say group quarter because people are in campuses like this. You guys, if you live on campus, you have to group quarter accommodation. So if you want to back to the university type of people, you need that. You also have people you work with, right? You probably spend and talk to your colleagues, potentially more than your people at home. At least I do. Yeah.
Maybe this is an old-fashioned question, but why do you have to rely on social media? Why do you have to?
Because the reason is
The
because
data you can ask, were you vaccinated or not?
no. So we're using social media here in the sense of, do you trust? If you try to make a decision, how do you make a decision? Do you trust people from your friends, your colleagues, or do you trust people or things that your friends online, so to speak? So that's what we're trying to get at here, is trying to understand out of these three full spaces, the cyber space, the physical space, and your relational space, who do you trust more for your information? Because we know some people only trust what they read online. We know other people trust their colleagues more than their spouses. Right? We know that, but we don't know exactly how that plays out.
And it's very volatile.
It's variable, yes.
Volatile.
Yes, it can change. But once you get vaccinated, you're vaccinated though.
Yeah, but
Right.
that's getting a real thing.
Yes, yeah, we'll get back to the real data, we do have real vaccination data, this is what made this one really quite interesting, like the other one. We had actual real like we had housing sales data in the flooding one, here we have vaccination rates, right? So we're gonna get back to this, so the question is, and this is the research, you know, what influences me? So, you all have one choice. Who influences you the most? Your family, your friends, or your social media? Who says social media? Who says family? Who says friends? It's different, right? And this is the purpose. We want to capture that difference in
What about yourself?
yourself. Well, that comes into it. Hold on, I actually don't know if. Sorry, this is. I didn't want to go into the math of the model. But what you can sort of see here is the agents make decisions based on all many parameters around them, right? So they act asking about themselves, but also the people around them. I didn't want to go into the details of the mathematics of how the model works, but this is all based on opinion dynamics literature. So
That's
and
important, right?
pardon?
That's very important,
Yes.
because you can have a patient update on your belief, right?
Yeah, so the idea is you update your belief based on what's happening around you and so forth. So the idea is we build a model and we build models, and so we first build our synthetic population, our agents. The agents have age and sex, household type, are they married or not? Of course, that's going to influence your social network, your employment status, where do you go to school, who do you interact with, who do you work with, how much people use social media for. Different age groups will use social media differently, so we account for that. Young people much more likely to be on social media than older people. Rural people less likely to be on social media than urban people. We know all this from the Pew Research Foundation, for example. So these are some of the things that we go on inside the model. We create a synthetic population. We assign agents with age, gender. Do they live in urban or rural areas? That can also be a proxy for political leaning, or whatnot. And you know, where do they live in a sense like that? We generate their networks, who they interact with, based on where they live, where they work. And we also build these sites, social media networks. And then we sort of build an agent-based model for this. Then we model, at the moment we started off just modeling one county in New York State. And we recently extended this to the whole of New York State, thinking it was going to be easy. Because we got a really good fit and a really good validated model for one county. We thought, oh, it'd be easy just to take the whole of New York State. Not so much, because of the geographical variation in different things, right? We're modeling around 20 million people really here. So we have a model. So the model's predicting different things. So we have a weighting scheme. How much do you trust your physical, relational, and cyber spaces, right? So this is people are trusting in urban areas. They get the best model fit. They trust in urban areas. They trust the physical the most, and cyber and relational the least, right? So they trust it. While in rural areas, there's people. Oh, sorry, there's a wrong weighting. In urban areas, they trust their relational, who they go to school with, and what they have online. versus in rural areas, they trust in their family and friends more than what they read online. I think if that's right. What you're seeing here is vaccination rate over time. And then the two lines, the simulation is the red line, green line is the ground truth data. So you can sort of see, this is for every different county in New York City. You can sort of see, it varies a lot, right? Well, there's a couple of reasons for the variation. This is when vaccines were first available to the older population, right? This is when vaccines became available to the 45 plus population. This is when they became available to anybody, right? So these are what you sort of see in the trends, but not everyone got vaccinated and things like that. So you get a sense, different waiting speeds for urban and rural will lead to different vaccination rates. Because, you know, you might see a lot of variations here, but out of 62 counties in New York State, only 12 or 9 have different really significant vaccination rates compared to what our simulation sort of has. If you look at the vaccinations where we overestimate and underestimate, so underestimation is red, overestimation is in blue. So again, we just using a very simple opinion dynamics model to based on your opinions on your speak or where we have. You can sort of see large underestimation in Hamilton County. Does anyone know Hamilton County at all? It's very famous for one thing, lots and lots of vacation homes. Not many people live there, right? And because not many people live there in the census, right? We didn't capture them. But during COVID, where did you not have to go? Pardon? No, you didn't have to go to work, right? But everybody who was living in New York City, right, went to their vacation home, which is up here. That explains one. So there's a lot of things. Our model, this model, we thought was going to be great, right? We thought we could, you know, but there's some of the underlying data we used to build the model was sort of different. Same as Tompkins. This is where Cornell is, right? Again, faculty might have gone elsewhere for that. And again, we sort of underestimate also in New York City. Again, people left New York City for those types of things. But in reality, you know, we have a very small type of error with respect to 10% variation in daily vaccination rates, which is not that bad from a very relatively simple model. But the idea is we can build models to better understand and model the world around us, and that's one of those sort of simple examples within CITES here. But you know, it does is it good enough to say I get 81% of vaccination rates correct? It could be better if we tuned it a bit more, but still 81% is better than nothing when we're trying to predict something. And that's one big question. How good does the model have to be within CITES here? So just to wrap up, if that's okay, I have like 5 minutes or so, is where do I see analysis going? And some of the guys I've talked to this morning, some of this will not come to a surprise, but I think we have to be cognizant of the growth of AI, right? And yes, while AI has been around for a long time, things are changing in this realm. And I want to say, I don't want to see AI just from a computer science perspective. I think AI will make things easier from the GIS perspective. So, you know, if I wanted to gather really detailed data about the world around us, traditionally, you know, it was very time consuming. You have to go out and survey. You have to actually, you know, if you want to do some computer vision work on images, I need to have do programming background and things like that. You know, I think the advancements now in these multimodal large language models give us, you know, new ways to extract information about the world around us, right? And, you know, I'm wondering now, will this sort of make GI science easier? Or, but you have, with a caveat, you have to understand, you have to trust but verify. Is that the expression from the military? And this got us back from work, you know, nice to be about editor, I can sometimes write editorials. So I was curious, you know, what can we do? When ChatGPT first came out with the ability to upload an image, you get an answer from it, right? Which is different from uploading a text and then getting a text from it. So if I asked you, where is this photo taken? You guys would all say, right? And what are the geographical coordinates? No one, right? When I have ChatGPT that, it gave me it, right? I'm like, this is quite cool, right? And I'm like, so I was like, okay, so give me some geographical knowledge, right? Okay, there's no geographical reasoning yet within the AI community, but there is geographical knowledge within inside of this. So then I was like, how could we do something different with respect to this? So, I've always wanted to do street view imagery work, but I didn't have the skill set to do it, right? I'm very technical, but I've never gone down the computer vision route, and I didn't really want to. But can I get the large language model to do that for me? That's a big question we have here. So what we've been working with Ching Ching and Linda C is saying we want to build a database of building heights, building age, and building type for global coverage of data using crowdsourced street view imagery. Why do you want to do that? Building energy use models need this information, but it's not currently available. Right? So the question is, how good is ChatGPT at doing this type of thing? So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, some audience participation. This is a street view image from Mapillary. Mapillary is like Street View, but free for us to use, collected by people like you and me with videos in our cars. If I ask you, classify the leftmost building in this image, residential, mixed use, or commercial, you would say. Okay, let's hands up for residential. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Mixed use. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Commercial. So about 7, 7, 50, 50, right? You guys are experts here. You are people. No, I bring this up because it's about classification, right? Yeah. We always, in geography, we always classify for something, right? Yeah. So domain experts said residential mixed use, right? Those domain experts, one said it was mixed use because of this thing down the bottom. Yeah. The other said it was residential because they couldn't see any signage, yeah. Right? Another question. Classify the rightmost building, you would say?
Commercial. Which can be in Chinese.
Now, which one was the rightmost building? Who chose this one?
This one.
No, why not this one? That's the right one.
Oh, I see.
Right? That's why there's about, so if you don't ask ChatGPT the right question, right? This is what the domain experts said, right? So we actually went in. We have a whole paper on this, right? But the idea is we're trying to classify buildings and trying to understand them, right? So you can, this is just one example. You upload a photo to ChatGPT. These photos are geo-referenced, by the way, so we know where they're located. And we just ask ChatGPT, what is the age of the building? What's the height of the building? And is it residential, commercial, or mixed use? And it spits out an answer, right? We can then store that answer and build a detailed sort of database. So here's some examples of identifying residential areas in New York City, again, mixed use areas, commercial areas, and things like that. There are some issues with it, but it does a relatively good job at classifying buildings for us and heights. And we have a whole paper on this. But the idea is, I think there's something in AI with respect to urban analytics. Where it's going, I don't know yet. But I think it's exciting time for the students to play around with these things and see what's happening. We can ground truth this. We can also do the same thing for other projects. So again, working with Linda C, she's been doing a lot of damage assessments. So she would ask the crowd, this is before, after, this is before and after a hurricane. Is there any damage in the buildings? The crowd would say yes, no. We can ask ChatGPT the same question. Here's an image. Ask the same questions that we would do to the people and get an answer. Again, we can see how good it is at image interpretation types of tasks. We can ask them different types of ecosystems. So we put an image here, land use, and and we ask them what is the result, and it gives us relatively good answers as well. But again, it gives us different ways of thinking about sort of the data and how the world works around us. We can use it for modeling. I spend a lot of time, and my students spend a lot of time developing agent-based models. On general, an agent-based model that I get from try to get published. It'll take me about a month to 6 months to get up and running. Right? I spend a significant amount of time creating models. The question is, can we use these large language models to build our models for us and run the models and validate them, right? So again, we asked ChatGPT, because that's how one that we had all the API credits for, to read a paper. This paper does not exist as an agent-based model in Python online, but create me an agent-based model based on the description of the paper, right? So this is something that would probably take a student who's good at programming 2 days to do, right? So ChatGPT has created me the model, it generates the results, it compares the model to us, we can check the code. We might realize that ChatGPT, the large language model, missed a bit of the paper. Just like when we write something, we might miss something out. We can then say regenerate the code with this piece of information that you've missed. It regenerates the code, like it's done. It's updated the code, regenerates the model, and things like that. So the other question is, how can we leverage large language models to build better models? People are already using large language models for hurricane prediction and things like that. You know, as social scientists, can we leverage them to build agent-based models? And we're doing this for well-known models like this good order model here, but also for other things like geographically explicit models. So we did one where we asked it, read this paper on restaurant choice, come up with the most salient topics of why you go to a restaurant from this paper. Then create me a Python model of this, stylize it on Yelp data, consumer behavior reviews in St. Louis, and then run the model and see what happens. And it did it for us, right? So the question is will these large language models lower the boundary into these areas as well? You know, I think there's a lot of broader applications. You know, it allows us to collect data or use data in different ways. It really allows advanced GIS tools like image processing techniques available to nearly anyone, with the caveat that we still need to double check that it works. And you know, it has, you know, ability to do more data-driven sort of work for urban planners. And it's not just, you know, the toy things I've shown here, text analysis, coding, all of this can be sped up and leveraged using AI techniques. So I really think it's opening up the world around us. But what I'm trying to say is, you know, the world's complicated. No model's going to be ever perfect, you know. But if we want to capture the world around us, we need to think about modeling and capturing data that allows us to look at the macro level, generated from the micro level. And that data is generated by many individuals, all of their different beliefs and things. Urban analytics allows us that ability to explore the world around us, to understand it at different spatial and temporal scales. And, you know, there's still a big challenge in developing good models and developing models of realistic behavior. But you know, and leverage data in different types of ways. But you know, what we see at one level, let's say Newark, is generated because of all of you guys and everyone else in the city, right? And to kind of capture all of that is challenging. Then thank you so much, and hopefully there's some questions.
I have 2 questions that they follow on each other. So for agent-based modeling, apparently the rules how agent interact is probably the most fundamental, important thing in one of the modeling.
Yes,
So
yeah, that's pretty true.
how do we make sure that we captured all the if condition? And I think that's one thing. And then another is, for each agent, maybe they have a interaction rule, but for a group of people, even if we have exact same sort of demographics, we might make different decision, or they select from a set of decisions. So if your model is capturing the stochastic kind of behavior in a way that you know, each time your simulation the outcome might change, and it becomes a distribution.
Yeah.
And then
yeah,
that's
so let me see the first question. You know, it would be lovely to capture everything in our decision-making process. That's really hard to do. There are some cognitive frameworks I saw in ACTA that like try to do the theory of mind, how one thinks, And if it comes up with a situation where it's never seen before, it'll then compute something. That's how some of the reinforcement learning algorithms can work out. But in reality, capturing every possible thing is really hard to do, because then you haven't got like then you've got probably one of the most complicated models in the world. Anyone fans of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? One person, thank you. So in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, they're trying to answer what's the question, the answer to the question, the 42. What's the meaning of life?
What is the meaning?
And the answer is 42. But to get that, they have to generate, they make the Earth as an experiment, right? And they model all the real people. But there's this idea by a guy called Volker Grimm and his community, from ecology, called pattern-oriented modeling, that says, you should really focus on sort of the patterns that you want, not specifically the definitive use case. So you try to generate enough to explain what you're trying to get at, but don't make it overly specific. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge. It's an art, right? So I can guarantee that the vaccination model could be improved if I did X, Y, and Z. But the question is it worth the effort? I think if you have a sensible representation of why you have the behaviors that you have, that's me good enough. But then, there's a whole open but there's also one thing I would love to see is everybody, maybe in the climate scientist, you'll have weather model 1, weather model 2, weather model 3, different people doing ocean circulation, for example, right? And then they'll compare their ocean circulation models together to get a result, or compare the differences. In the social sciences, nobody compares their model outputs. There's no intermodal comparison exercises yet. That would also be very interesting to help address that question. And then the second question was stochasticity.
Yeah.
I guess you have to run the model to see how many times you need to visit, right? And then see every time you run the model, you get a different answer, right? And I guess the question is, if memory serves, I'm trying to remove the question. Well, every time you run the model, you get different results. You have to run the model multiple times. The question is, are the decisions therefore impacting the future? I don't know. Yeah. Sorry.
I hope I.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Another question.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, this is a simple question. This alien-based modeling, is it to model other sensitive agent?
We can represent anything. So that's the worst thing. There's no real definition of what is an agent. So we can have an agent as an individual, like I could model everybody in here with lots of characteristics, or I can have a representative university professor, a representative student. But we try to model lots of individuals and then get those individuals to interact. Or you put often the choice of what is the agent that is depending on what you're modeling. So if you're doing pedestrian modeling, you'd model lots of individuals, and you might give different agents different like walking speeds based on their size or age, right? Or you focus on the decision-making unit. So in evacuation models, it's very individualistic. You all want to evacuate, right? But when it comes to buying and selling houses, it's not really individualistic, right? You buy or sell a house based on the household. So your unit in the housing market models tend to be households. Does that make sense? So it really does depend on what is the application and what makes sense to you to be the individual. But there's no homogeneous agent. Every agent is different from each other. Just like in this room, we're all slightly different. We'll try to capture that heterogeneity. Maybe it'll be income level, maybe it'll be age, maybe it'll be when was the last time we ate food? So how hungry we are, those types of things. We try to have no representative agent per se, but heterogeneous relations.
Well, think about this traffic modeling. Say I wanted to be around that commute. So when you model one decision usually, or you model. How do you
model that.
How do you decide, well, the individual optimize the route, etc. right?
So, yeah, so in the traffic, so in the traffic models, those models are more focused on individual behavior, like heterogeneous behavior. You just try to get people to get from one place to another place. So you give them a route between A and B. You might have preferences. Some people, like my wife, hates driving on the freeway. We would incorporate that into their model. So that person would always drive side streets and things like that. So you have so any rule we have in our model, we try to justify that rule with some type of literature or something that we know that makes sense. So if we know that certain people have different driving habits, we try to incorporate that into those demographics of people. So in the vaccination model, we would have agents in older people in rural areas. We know what percentage are likely to use social media. And that percentage is also based on income. So we try to parameterize those usage, those people in those things. We try to build the behaviors of what we know. But then again, these models can also be used as thought experiments to test those questions that we don't know. So if we don't know how people behave, we might make like assumptions and see what happens.
A quick question, but the overall interest I have in this is the complex systems and emergent phenomena, and you have the alternative, the system dynamics models, which I also and I have a very cursory knowledge of the actual mechanics of models, so please forgive me for that. But often with those models also they say, well, these are great for emergent behavior, like traffic. It's the same way. But then your agent-based models, you are also saying are also great for.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what is the differentiator? Yes, I see that one is looking at the level of the agent, but like, is it a cost factor, like resolution factor?
So each modeling approach has its pros and cons, right? In system dynamics models, there's no individual in system dynamics models, there's just stocks. It's a stock of people who are susceptible to a disease. That stock will flow into stock of people who are now infected, right? While in an agent-based model, you have individuals so you don't have stock of individuals, you have just lots of individuals who are susceptible to disease. But that person, I might get infected because I've come in contact with somebody. In the dynamic model, that's not possible. There's no contact per se. There's only a contact rate. So that's a global mixing. So if I were to model the whole of the University of Delaware as a system dynamics model for a disease model, you have a stock of all students in Delaware campus, right? Who are susceptible to disease. In an agent-based model, you have individuals geolocated. Now, in system dynamics, there's a probability of anybody on campus flowing from susceptible to infected. In an agent base, you only get flow from one to the other because you've actually come in contact with someone. So the mechanism of diffusion is slightly different. So you'll get the same result, which is susceptible infected recovery curves. But the reason how you get there is very different. And the rate of how you get there.
But then what is your deciding factor in choosing one versus the other? Is it the level of data that you have available?
If I want to focus on the individual, I'll go always agent-based model. If I want to focus on the system itself, I could go system dynamics route. So,
but the agent itself, in the larger scheme of things,
Doesn't
the
matter.
agent it's not consequential. You are saying yes, it's there, but your output is.
but it's how you get there that matters.
But that's what I'm asking,
Yeah.
like, what is it, the data aspect, you need to know who it.
So this is the thing, the agent-based modeling doesn't have to be data-driven, right? It can also be thought experiments and things like that. It's really, and we don't have data, like, there's no data set on human behavior, right, per se. Movement data tells me I'm here today and I've flown to Buffalo tonight. That's what the cell phone's going to tell me. It's not going to tell me why I did this, right? So the agent base is really trying to understand why people do what they do and how and things like that. I don't think it's a data limitation. It's also just the process, like system dynamics models are really easy to draw and really easy to flow, right? The computation is super easy, right? That's when Forrester came out with it. Like Forrester came out with an urban growth model. That's one of the first applications of system dynamics, right? But the explanatory power of how the system gets to where it gets to is very different. It's all about trying to understand, what are the underlying mechanisms. So I think, in that book, in the last chapter, we actually compare system dynamics, ABM, another technique called cellular automata models, discrete event simulation or queuing models, to try to understand, to the same application, the disease dynamics type of thing. But how you get to the result is very different. It's, and if individuals matter, and we know that the individuals do matter, even in, you can't get those individuals in a system dynamics model. So that's why I would say, yes, you can use a system dynamics model to look at a complex system. But if you really want to understand the interactions between people in a complex system, you can't do that unless you have created a system dynamics model for every single person in the complex system. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah,
If not,
then I have to do more reading. Always learning.
thank you.
Let's have a last question. Before we go on this. Go ahead.
Did people use your prediction model for the vaccines?
This goes back to no. I'm smirking for the students, right? So when do I start a research project? Is when the funding runs out, right? Or when I get the publication. And I haven't talked to the Erie County Health people actually. They actually they actually led us to the vaccination rates, but we never went back to them. And that's partly because from a practitioner point of view, I don't go to that level yet. Because it's a lot of work talking to people. I'm sorry, it's a terrible answer, but it's the way that I am is I don't talk to the practitioners per se very often.
Actually, this is actually one potential area to explore using agent-based model for policy design. So you can have these different scenarios as policies and then fit into the agent-based model to have actually the predictable outcomes. And then based on outcomes, then you feed back to the design of the policy or scenario, and then run an agent-based model again. So going through the root.
And it's we were talking about this earlier, and it's super. That's really a really good problem to do. It's very big in the sort of farming community, ABM people, but it's super time consuming because when you involve with stakeholders, it takes a lot of effort, and that's being academic, or that's not one of the successes, right? Is what counts, grants and publications.
The British government has used that a lot in like development assistance programs with developing countries, what policy works. The same like they use RCTs, the randomized controlled trials, which are very expensive. That is not a model, you're actually running the more experiment.
I was thinking on trying to influence vaccination rates. Would you look for critical leaders? Would you look on social media, depending on the county?
Yeah, it's also like if I was going to do policy recommendations, I would work out in that model. It really is who's the crucial people, who's the person people listen to the most, right? Is it the local radio? Because we know from the COVID area, there's a lot of marketing right at the beginning to get vaccinated. Then that marketing died up, right? And so you can sort of hint at who's important. You can identify the key nodes in the network if you wanted to, but. Our funding ran out for the project. Thank you.
Let's thank Dr.
Thank you so much.
I was